Welcome to FounderLine, the show where we answer your questions about startups. I'm your host, Joe Beninato. Thanks for joining us live from London today, which is very exciting. We're going to have a great episode today. Thanks for being here. Our goal is to provide a forum where startup people can get their questions answered. So whether you're a startup founder and you're thinking about starting a company, you might be deciding if you're going to take a job at a company, whatever it might be, if you have a question about startups, we're going to try and help you out. This is a live show, and we want to hear from you. So we want you to call us or email us or tweet at us so we can answer your questions. So from the US, you can call us toll-free 1-844-4FOUNDER. That's 844-436-8633. From Europe, you can call us directly. It's 1-602-753-1628. That's 1-602-753-1628. The email address is help@founderline.com, or you can tweet to @FounderLine, and we'll try and get your questions answered. With that, let's get started. Our guest today is Roberto Bonanzinga, who's a partner at Balderton Capital, which is where we're located today here in London. Roberto's an old friend. He's worked both in the US and in Europe, and he's an investor in many companies, including Vivino, Wooga, and Banjo. Roberto, welcome, and thank you for joining us on FounderLine.
Thank you to you, and welcome to you to London, right?
Thank you.
The first time we are together in London.
Exactly. The last time we were together was in Italy. We both are of Italian heritage, and I was lucky enough to get over there last summer and meet you in Sicily, which was an amazing time. So, so usually before we dive into questions, I'd like to spend a little bit of time getting to know our guest and just generally chatting and finding out more about them. So it'd be great to get a little bit of background. You've been lucky enough to have worked both in Silicon Valley as well as now here in Europe. For how long now? How long you've been working in Europe?
So I came back from the US in 2000.
Okay, so 14 years. Yeah, it's a long time.
We are getting older.
Believe me, I feel it every day. So, so I'm curious, you know, I don't know the startup scene here very well, and since you've lived through both, it's changed quite a bit in the States, as you know. You go back all the time, but maybe you can tell us how entrepreneurship and startups are different in the two areas, Europe, or maybe London specifically, and Silicon Valley.
No, I think the point you just made is interesting, right? Is Europe or London? And you know, I think something to remember is that Europe, it's a lot of different type of things. And I don't think there is such thing as a European entrepreneurship. I think there is a type of entrepreneurship that gets connotated in each different country. And you know, one of the biggest richness of Europe is the fact that you have the UK, you have Germany, Sweden. All of these are, you know, it's not like they are like states in the US. They are standalone countries with their own ecosystems, you know, their own GDPs, their own drivers of growth, and everything like that. So, you know, one thing for all of us never to forget is that there is no one single ecosystem that is the European ecosystem, but there are a multitude of ecosystems. I would say no, even in some cases at the country level, but even at the city level.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the ecosystem of Berlin and the ecosystem of Munich, they are quite different. And, you know, I would make the argument that this is basically very true for the rest of Europe, too. And if there is something that I've seen, of which I'm obviously fairly excited, is when, you know, I moved here in 2000 from the Bay Area, and I was going around, you know, my friends were asking me, you know, what do you do? And, you know, I work in startups, have to do with startups. People couldn't really place that. What is it? You know, what does it really mean?
People here.
People here, right? And I remember, you know, but well, it's a type of company. What does it really mean? And I think one thing we have been for sure achieved in Europe in the last, you know, 15 years is now, you know, entrepreneurship as becoming, you know, a topic that is really becoming more and more mass market. You know, you hear that on television.
Really?
You hear it all over it. Yes, because, you know, entrepreneurship is seen as a potential significant engine of growth for a region, Europe, that, you know, as the United States, which we are for sure significantly more challenging in growth that we have never been in the past.
Yeah, yeah.
So all of a sudden, you know, everything is becoming a little bit significantly more mainstream. And at the same time, the other point that I think is important to notice is you really see companies and entrepreneurs, you know, popping up everywhere in Europe. So it's true, you know, that there are some ecosystems a little bit more advanced than others, but it's also true that I really believe the next big thing could start pretty much everywhere in Europe, you know, from, you know, Barcelona to Milan to Stockholm. Then there is a different question, and maybe we can talk about that later. Independently from where it starts, you know, where is the best place where you can grow it? Because obviously growth is function of your capability to attract talent and many other things. So there are some, for sure, there are some parts in Europe where that is a bit easier.
Like a little bit of a technology hub, like London has obviously developed.
Yeah, I mean, London is a bit of that. I think Berlin is a bit of that. I think, you know, Stockholm is a bit of that. I think Helsinki is a bit of that. I think Tallinn is a bit of that. Is it not funny? Already I mentioned 5.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting to see how some of these ecosystems have very little to do with the size of the town or of the country. You know, Finland is, the whole country is 5 million people, still is extremely fervid in terms of entrepreneurship.
Wow. It's amazing. And I think about the US and just, you know, New York is not the same as Silicon Valley, although it's evolved quite a bit, but it can't be nearly the difference that you see with Helsinki versus, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, I remember this when I came back from the US as an operator, and, you know, I was always dealing with these issues, talking to my friends in the US, you know, how difficult it was to build a sales force capable to sell in San Francisco, and then you need to do a sales force capable to sell in New York. How different is, you know, the East Coast from the West Coast.
Right.
You guys speak the same language, use the same currencies, is the same television, the same type of
same
culture,
laws,
same laws,
right.
Same everything. Think about the level of complexity when you go in a place where to build a sales force in Germany is a fairly different thing to do than build one in Italy or in the UK.
Got it.
Right?
Interesting. Well, so one of the other things that's really changed is the way companies get funded. And it used to be, you know, 10 years ago, guys would walk into a VC with a PowerPoint deck and maybe a founding team of 3 or whatever it is, and they'd raise $3 million, right? And that'd be essentially their seed money to go figure out what they're doing and go. And the advent of, you know, the micro VCs as well as Kickstarter and AngelList, that's really changed the economics, at least in Silicon Valley. Now, you know, they want you to have raised some money already from friends and family, maybe have a working product like that's taking off and going like crazy. So I'm curious how that's happening over here. Balderton, I don't know if you guys do both seed as well as, you know, Series A's and B's, but maybe talk about how that's evolved and how it might be different than some of the stuff you see going on in the States right now.
So, you know, Balderton main focus is in the early stage space. I would say our bread and butter is the round A's. That's where we start to get
like
involved.
A $3 million A or something like that?
But the truth is, you know, we have been always very opportunistically driven. So if we find a great entrepreneur that is working on something, needs less cash, but that's the stage in which the company is, we will probably do it. If he needs a bit more cash, we'll do it. We tend to be more opportunistically driven based on a very specific formula of percentage of the fund that we need to invest on anything.
Okay.
You know, in terms of the question you raise, I mean, there are no doubts that I think the ecosystems are evolving and changing. As you just mentioned, in the US, we have seen lots of interesting phenomena in that space. Do I see something similar happening in Europe? The answer to that question is yes. But there is also an important point I must be clear. Because I always get, you know, this comparison, okay, between the US and Europe, you know, what's the difference, how they're similar and so on. The truth is that I don't, you know, overall Europe as an ecosystem for European tech entrepreneurship in general, I would say, is significantly less developed, has got less history.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that have been significantly more proven and advanced in Europe, in the US, we are starting, here with some elements of delays. Now, this was, I would say that these two lines, the delays of this, Europe versus US, is obviously, getting converging in a meaning that I see obviously the speed at which Europe is catching up is very fast, but it's still a different type of ecosystem in a different stage of life. I think that must be very clear.
Okay.
So to your question is, do we see people using more Kickstarters? The answer to this question is yes, of course we see it. Do we see, angel listers trying to come to Europe and get regulated by the European regulators? And the answer, yes, we see all of that is happening too. But obviously, it will happen all in a different way. I think that is the important point at the end of it.
Yeah.
It's less about replicating what has been working in the US and try to replicate it here. I think it's more about taking advantage of the uniqueness of Europe and exploiting it.
Okay.
So we see all the different phenomena, but all take a little bit of a different type of shape. I would say that's the way to look at it.
So that's a little bit about maybe some of the funding things. What about technology trends? Any interesting things going on here? I know you focus primarily on consumer-related, social media-related things.
SaaS, consumer internet, mobile, have been done a little bit of everything, marketplace. Again, I actually don't think there is something where Europeans have special or different, right? I think if you look at some, our last exit, was Natural Motion. We sold it to Zynga, that was a gaming company. Do I think Europeans are better than everybody else in games? Probably not. If you look also some of the public success, I'm just thinking some of the other companies have been IPO lately, one in the ad tech space, one is in the marketplace space. I don't think there is a Europeanness of, okay, these type of things started in Europe. And I think entrepreneurship doesn't follow any rules.
Yes.
And I think, who knows, right? Skype started here. Does it mean that we have an age on VoIP? I'm not sure this is true anymore.
Okay.
I think everything is becoming significantly more global, and I would say significantly more mobile, but not mobile in the device sense of mobile, but in fact, migrating and moving. I think we are moving more into what I call migrating entrepreneurs. This is an interesting phenomenon I think we are observing, where entrepreneurs start somewhere, and then when they need to grow their business, they move in the place where it makes most sense.
Yes. Okay. Well, it was interesting on the drive over here. I tried Uber to see how it would work in London, and I had a nice chat with the driver, and it's very interesting how it's disrupting, the taxis. What is it called? The black car?
Black car.
Yeah, and the black car people are very upset, and there's some of that going on back in the States as well.
That's some in the States, but for at the same time, you have also some European companies. There is one called Hello that is not one of our investment, but has been adapting, if you wish, the concept of Uber to the black cab world. Right? So you see elements of this adaptation all the time.
Makes sense. Well, he was just talking about how the black car drivers are not happy with the Uber drivers. Like, they don't like them, and they get paid to recruit other drivers to come to Uber, and it was a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's the same conversation.
minutes.
If you go to New York, you talk to a yellow cab driver.
Yeah, same
have
thing.
Discussions about Uber.
Yeah.
They're probably not gonna be delighted.
That's right. That's
but,
right.
That's what innovation does.
All right, good. Well, that's a little bit, just about what's going on here, and we're gonna try and answer some questions. So once again, if you want to call us from the U.S., you can call 1-844-4FOUNDER. That's 844-436-8633. From Europe, you can call 1-602-753-1628. I hope we get some calls from Europe, but you never know with this time of day. And you can also,
World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. And you can email help@founderline.com, or you can tweet to @founderline, and we're keeping an eye on those as they come in. So first question came in from Massimo over email. So Massimo asks, what's your opinion about the Italian startup ecosystem? So something probably close to your heart, right?
Being Italian. So what can I say? The Italian startup ecosystem, so if the level of maturity of the European startup ecosystem is less mature than the American one, obviously the Italian one is probably less mature than many of the other European. So I think there is lots of work to be done there. But at the same time, there are some pretty impressive success that have been happening. We invested in a company a long time ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago now, called Yux. It was an e-commerce company. These guys helped Armani and Dolce & Gabbana to fundamentally start selling on the internet. The company that did extremely well, start in Italy, look at all, world, the market, global markets, and, is today publicly quoted in the Italian stock exchange. I think it's worth something in the neighborhood of $1.5 billion or $2 billion.
Wow.
So what can I tell you about the Italian ecosystem? It is a less mature ecosystem, but despite that, it doesn't mean that there are not great opportunities there, right? So it's more about figure out what is that you want to do, figure out if makes sense to build a company for the Italian market or makes sense to build a company from Italy for a global market, and take advantage of the situation. What I can tell you is even in Italy, that again I believe there is a bit less going on. That, for instance, in Berlin or in London, there is a clear change of public perception around the opportunity for tech entrepreneurship.
Really?
Yeah, even just reading the newspapers and all of that. But one thing is perception, one thing is reality. So what does Italy need? It's another Nicholas Zenstrom. But they do. I mean, I give you an example. The guys from Buongiorno did a fantastic job starting a company in Italy, growing it outside of Italy, and eventually they got acquired from the guys at NTT Docomo. The guys at Dada did a fantastic job to start a company from scratch, take it public, and so on. Virgilio, so there are some great examples of Italian entrepreneurs that have done great things. We need more. And it's important, I think, that the more established entrepreneurs become more visible, because they become a source of inspiration for the youngest.
Yeah. What I don't know the Italian ecosystem well. Are there specific cities where a lot of this is happening, like in Roma, or is it all over the place? It can come from anywhere.
Italy is pretty complicated because in it's quite fragmented geographically. There are lots of cities of a certain scale.
Yeah.
Historically, Milan, Torino, and Florence, believe it or not, actually. And I think, and I'm thinking about also Rome, just thinking of Venere, that was a great example of a website focused on e-commerce for tourism. So,
which makes sense, like Rome, lots of tourists, maybe...
not sure, to be honest, I think it happened.
Yeah.
That the entrepreneurs were there, they started
That's just
there,
where they're from.
more than anything else. And maybe, it will be helpful if there will be more of a hub in Italy. But I don't think, again, you can change that, right? So that's the way how Italy operates.
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
very bit spread,
regional,
right?
yeah.
More regional.
So you probably...
Yux started in Bologna.
Oh, yeah?
That is very famous for food.
Well, and lots in Milano I get from e-commerce and the brands, the fashion labels and all that. So you probably get people coming to you from all over the place, right? Europe. I know you invested in Banjo, which is Redwood City, right?
Yeah.
So how do you handle that? Like you can't just hop down to Milano. I guess you could on a regular basis. So you must use some filtering process to decide, or are most of the companies here in London that Balderton works on?
No, I think this is an interesting discussion. I think there are two things happening. First of all, I actually do believe that personally, a significant amount of my work has been around what I call around the walk. So actually, every time I go in a place, and I may go in a place, because I maybe I'm visiting a company, or because I maybe have a board meeting of one of my company, I always try to tap into the local entrepreneurial ecosystem and try to meet, the key guys and try to organize maybe a small event with young entrepreneurs. And I do that proactively, even if in some cases there is not a deal. So, if it happens that I need to be in Milan for some things, I always try to connect with that. Okay, how can I meet as many interesting entrepreneurs as possible?
I see.
When I go to Berlin, for board meetings, I always try to append, one day more so that I can actually smell the scene. I'm a big believer of that.
Yeah.
On one side, and I've been done a lot of that historically, and that's why, if you think about some of the investments we have done, also the ones I've done in my portfolio, some are in Sweden, Copenhagen, Berlin, it's quite spread geographically.
Yeah.
But the second thing, I think more importantly, is there is a lot today that can be done with technology. Right? So I always get approached by entrepreneurs that tell me, what's the best way to get in touch with me? In today's world, to get in touch with me, go on Twitter, go on Facebook, use any element of, communication. Guess which one could be my nickname on Skype and just bombard me. I actually like to be bombarded because to me, the way how you bombard me is already saying something about who you are and what you do.
Like, this person is a hustler,
and
they figured out how to get to me.
It means something, right?
Yeah.
And then the way how they position what they're doing, right? And, the thing I love the most is people that contact me on Twitter, somehow they engage me and they show me a prototype through Twitter. How smart is that?
Yeah.
Because not only it's a way how they engage in my attention, if you wish, even outside of my inbox, but more importantly, they're making that public.
Yeah.
That is, so doing that, it means that not only everybody else is watching, also the fact that I'm watching that thing, right? That I per se, I think is quite interesting.
So have you funded a deal off of Twitter?
Vivino.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
They originally reached out over...
I reached them out on Twitter because I actually saw, Vivino was a great example of a company I actually thought was an American company. I just didn't pay enough attention. I was in the US, a friend showed to me, and he told me, it's an American company, they only have American wines, crappy wines. For Europeans, American wines are not good.
I think the people in Napa Valley might have something to say about that.
Well, it depends. If you are used to Barolo, I think even those guys might agree with you.
Yes.
But anyway, the joke was, so in my mind, I never registered Vivino. I thought, okay, some, Napa Valley,
discount wine.
Discount wines. And then at some point, actually, because of some friends, some connection on Twitter, I saw tweets about Vivino being Copenhagen. That's how I found out.
Okay.
So that's something that I think. And then, last piece is, you mentioned in the past, just before, how the world of venture is changing because of platform. I also think there is a huge opportunity for the world of venture to evolve because of data. Because if you think about the way how the internet works and all these different platforms, and therefore all these startups that start, they all become somehow visible, and all of them, I would say, leave traces on the internet. So one thing right now is significantly fascinating my brain is how can you make sense of those traces on the internet about startups as a way to detect signals.
And figure out if it's a good investment.
And figure out through signals a new approach to discovery.
Huh. That's cool.
That's something that fascinates me quite a lot. Right?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, good. Well, hopefully we answered Massimo's question. We're going to move on to the next question here from Michael. It was an email that came in. What advantages are there to starting up a company in England or Europe as opposed to the U.S.? Maybe it's legal, regulatory, financial, resources like hiring. So you've seen both sides. What are the advantages over here?
I don't think it's a question of advantages or disadvantages. To me, it's always a question of matching. Given the problem you're trying to solve, where is the best place to do so? And also what is your core competence into that. So I give you an example, right? If you want to start something that address the European market, or you address the UK market, it probably makes significantly more sense. Even if you start the company in Italy, if you want to address the UK market, it might make some sense for you to move actually to the UK. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's less about figure out, okay, here are the pros, the cons. It's more figure out, okay, based on what is the entrepreneur in this case want to do, what is the business idea, where is the best place to locate the company on one side. On the other side, based on the entrepreneur's network, where is the best chance entrepreneurs got to attract talent? Because at the end, let's don't forget, right, that one of the key things that everybody always try to minimize, but becomes the most important bottleneck to growth, is the capability of a company to attract talent.
Exactly.
And if you have zero network and you are starting from scratch, you may want to think twice before moving somewhere else, right? So it depends on the idea, depends on the opportunity, depends on the angle of the market, it depends on the network of the entrepreneurs and or the people around the entrepreneur, the investors, the advisors, and everybody like that.
Yeah.
I wish there would be such a black and white formula that says, if you do this, then you locate the company here. I'm not sure that works.
Makes sense. Well, given the earlier things we talked about, it sounds good. So we need to take a moment and thank our sponsors. So relax, have a drink. I'll just remind you again, to call and to email and to tweet at us. The phone numbers from the U.S. 1-844-4-FOUNDER. From Europe 1-602-753-1628. Email help@founderline.com or tweet to @founderline, and we'll see if we can help you out. So this show wouldn't be possible without the support that we receive from our two amazing sponsors, Ustream and Orrick. And I'll start with Ustream. We're streaming this live from London, and it was a bit of an experiment. I had to basically create a TV studio in a box, I call it, and called the guys up over at Ustream and talked with them about what's the best way to do this. And about the only challenge we had was having to do it in 720 as opposed to 1080p because of the limitation on my MacBook CPU, believe it or not. But it's amazing. You can load up a suitcase full of equipment and go broadcast a show from wherever you want to, just using your laptop. And in our case, we have some extra stuff because of the calls and the microphones, but really straightforward to do. They've been great to work with. If you're thinking about streaming an event or doing some meetings, whatever it might be, give them a call or go to their website. It's ustream.tv, and they'll help you out. I'd also like to thank Orrick. We're going to get Mitch Zuklie, who's the chairman and CEO of Orrick, on the line here in a moment. And I always tell people that hiring your lawyer is a really important thing. Not certainly because of the legal aspects, which are important, but even more important is the fact that you have a great advisor who's working with you, who's seen so many more investments and transactions than you've seen. And I've worked with Mitch and the team over there for a number of years on previous companies as well as now with FounderLine, and they're the best. So make sure you get a great lawyer who can help you out, who can offer you advice. And you can find out more about Orrick by going to their website. It's orrick.com. So with that, we're going to turn to a segment we call Ask the Lawyer. And hopefully we're going to have Mitch Zuklie here on the line. Mitch is the chairman and CEO, as I mentioned. Mitch, we're over here in London. How are you today?
Doing great, Joe. How are you?
Great. Well, and the most amazing part is that this technology is actually working right now. So so I'm glad we were able to patch you in remotely. And today I thought we would, given the tone of this conversation about European companies and startups and entrepreneurship, as well as what's going on in America, I thought we could talk a little bit about companies coming from the U.S. who maybe want to do business in Europe. And so, Mitch, maybe you can start us off just by talking about some of the things, the considerations that a company from the U.S. might want to think about as they are coming to Europe, and then we'll get some thoughts from Roberto as well after you share your thoughts.
You bet, Joe. And I think, by the way, Roberto hit the nail on the head when he described that what's most important is to think about what makes sense for the business. Don't let some geography or geographic concern be the tail that wags the dog. Think about what makes sense for your business, and then think about how to adjust around the slightly different rules that will apply. The most significant thing to get used to in dealing with European businesses is that there are very different privacy rules that apply. That applies to you whether you're doing business there or whether you have a presence there. And it's just one important thing to pay attention to that people have background on. Lawyers know all about this stuff. The second thing I think to pay attention to is the issue of actually expanding in the area. If you choose to actually get an employee on the ground in the UK or elsewhere in Europe, you got to start to make you have to be thoughtful about it, because it can have meaningful tax consequences for you, and you have to think about how to set yourself up. Any competent lawyer can help you do that. It's not worth going through the details of that right now. But also, it's really important to understand that hiring and firing people is very different in jurisdictions outside the United States. The concept of at-will employees is not something that really applies in the same way that we think about it here. There's often a period of 6 months of a trial period where you can hire somebody and try them, but after that, you basically can't fire somebody just because you run out of money or something like that. So that's a big difference, and it's something you have to be knowledgeable about before you go ahead and actually take that step. Let me pause there and see if Roberto has additional thoughts.
Yeah, what do you think? Does that sound...
I mean, I think you just catch some of the biggest points to think about. You know, I'm not sure. I go back to what I said at the beginning, right? I always find funny when an American company think about, okay, let's go to Europe. Like if there is such thing as, you know, here I go to Europe. Right?
A single place,
yeah.
Right?
I think the question is, you know, what's your European deployment strategy? Which countries are we talking about? Because of what you just said, right? The truth is, do that, you know, do an expansion in Germany is very different to do an expansion in the UK. But you know, it's not only from a legal standpoint; it's also true from a cultural standpoint. Message is different. You know, how people relate to things may be different.
Yeah.
The overall, you know, a product might work in a place, might not work in a different place. I really think you need, as an entrepreneur, the moment in which you look at Europe as a potential expansion, ask yourself, you know, strategically, what are the implications for my business? And, you know, I think the legal ramifications, what you just described, are for sure some very important ones, but there are tons of ramifications for all the different functions of the business.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, great. Well, Mitch, any closing thoughts?
I think Roberto has it exactly right. And the other thing I'd say is, while there next to Roberto, make sure to enjoy some non-flabby wines, Joe.
Non-flabby wines. I don't know what that is. What is a non-flabby wine?
Roberto just made reference to American wines as flabby. And
I wouldn't say that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say that.
yeah.
Actually, you know, for a long time of my life, I knew American wines much better than Italian wines. So that was quite a big disappointment for my family.
I'm an equal opportunity wine drinker. So as long as it's a good big red, you know, Bordeaux, Cabernet from Napa Valley, I don't really mind. So.
I actually love, just for the records, my favorite wine is a Zinfandel.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some amazing Zins back in the States as well.
Yeah, no, that's exactly my point.
Well, we'll bring you back some European wine, Mitch, and make sure you can sample some of the good stuff instead of the garbage we drink back at home, apparently.
All right, Joe, sounds great. We'll talk to you guys in a week.
All right, thanks so much, Mitch.
Ciao, Mitch.
That's
Thank you. Bye.
that's Mitch Zuklie from Orrick. Thanks for joining us. And once again, if you want to reach us, give us a call, 1-844-4-FOUNDER. From the U.S., from Europe, 602-753-1628. Email help@founderline.com or tweet to @founderline. I'm sure I'm going to get in big trouble with the wineries back home. So I'm a California red guy. So
I think, despite the jokes, just to give you how I actually do believe that the U.S. on wines is very important. Actually, the CEO of Vivino company started in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
Actually, he moved to the Bay Area.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And the company's running from there now?
Well, it's basically a bit there, a bit here.
Oh, I see.
This is a model that we see a lot of
Yeah.
it. And I give you another example. Another company in Sweden, a Ticktail, that started as a European company out of Stockholm. Actually, recently also the CEO has been moving to New York because it makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
For what they're doing.
For what they're doing, the problem they're trying to solve.
So they keep the technology team that was already built in place, and
again, we believe or not, it depends.
Oh, yeah?
It depends on the specific of the company. In these two example, in the example of Vivino, the whole product team is built here, while if you wish the sales and marketing dimension is more built in the US. In the example of Ticktail, they might be some element of the product that we're actually looking at potentially do also out of the New York office.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many variables. It's crazy. So let's dive back in some questions here. We have an email from one of our regulars. We have a regular. So Larry from Yuba City, who writes in frequently. With your experience on both continents, what lessons have you learned in Europe that you think we need to learn in the United States?
Yeah, I think a bit of what I've been touching on is, diversity and be able to deal with diversity. I will never forget the time I was in the US. I was very young. The first time, one of my first meetings, I ended up into a meeting which there was a big pie chart on the projector with the domestic, non-domestic market.
That's it, huh?
So I think, again, just think very hard about the differences, because, if you are an Irish entrepreneur or, a Swedish entrepreneur or a Finnish entrepreneur, you think global from day one. You are somehow forced to be a global citizen because your market of reference is so small, you'll never build a very large business. So, you need to think about, okay, the world is my market. In the world, in which market I focus? And I think this is, something that is part of the European DNA, and I think is a little bit more far apart from the American entrepreneurial DNA.
Usually it's get it working, in one place, and then we'll worry about that later,
Yeah, and then doing this thing of internationalization. I never understood it.
Yeah, what is that?
What's a VP of international? I find it a bit interesting approach.
Yeah. I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago that was more popular, and now it's very specific. Like there might be a GM for Europe, right? And even that is a complicated role. Like, what does that mean? GM.
Maybe it's a sales role. Again, it depends.
Yeah.
But you need to agree with me how a lot of this has been changing in the last 15 years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'll give you an example, just to give some substance around some of these discussions. So, I am an investor in a company in Berlin called Vuga. I think they have about 300 people in Berlin. They speak German. Well, in the company they speak English, and I would say, I don't want to tell you wrong numbers, but more or less, I would say out of the 300, maybe 200, they are not Germans. They actually moved to Berlin to join Vuga from, it's like a United Nation in terms of from many different countries.
Wow.
And in the company, you go inside, you will never realize where you are. Everything is in English. They speak only English. They write only English. It's like you go inside, okay, I could be very well in South Market and I will never realize the difference.
Wow.
I don't think this was, 10, 15 years ago. I I don't think you will see a lot of that happening.
Yeah, oh, that's very cool. I like it. All right, well, we got, here's another related one. This is an email from Jeremy. How different is it working in a European startup versus a Silicon Valley startup? In the US, it is our perception that Europeans have a bit more work-life balance, and I'm wondering if that is true with startups. So, you know, in the Valley, you know, most companies, work-life balance is kind of a mythical thing that doesn't really exist. You work a lot, maybe not so much sleeping under your desk like in some cases in the past, but you know, we've always been jealous of Europeans. You know, they seem to enjoy their vacations more. They actually take vacation time instead of saving it up all the time. So how's it different working in the companies?
Again, I make this argument. I don't know exactly what European means, because I think if you compare somebody in Spain with somebody in Germany, the cultural differences are so broad, I mean, so huge and so different that I'm not sure how, you know, I can normalize around something. For sure, one thing is true, right? There is in Europe, I think people believe that you know, 3-4 weeks of vacation in a year, it's not a sin, it's part of life.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that you work, that you be on, you know, and then you also have vacation, and the fact you're on vacation doesn't mean you need to develop a sense of guiltiness around that, right? However, you know, at the same time, you know, if I think about some of the entrepreneurs with whom I'm working, they work like crazy, right? Because they are in a very important juncture of the life, you know, cycle of the company. And yes, they could get 3-4 weeks of vacation, but they get, you know, 1 or 2 because they just don't have the time. So I think a lot depends on the people. It depends on the culture of the people. It depends on where they are in their life. Depends on where the company is in the life cycle, and also depends on the country. So again, I'm afraid there is no like a general formula that I can apply.
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's move on. We have an email here from Nigel. How do investments and term sheets differ in Europe and the U.S.? We're getting a lot of comparing and contrasting. So I think that's an interesting question, because we even see it, you know, a difference between New York investors and Silicon Valley investors in terms of how they construct financings and term sheets.
So Balderton Capital started in 2000 as benchmark Europe.
That's right.
So if you wish, our DNA as a firm, also just in terms of the legal infrastructure, you know, the original term sheets and everything has been quite US centric. And so I'm not, again, I'm not sure there is such thing as a European investor, because I think, you know, we are quite different from what could be, you know, a small investment firm, I don't know, in Italy or somebody else in Sweden or in France and so on. For us, I don't think there is pretty much any difference.
So you like to keep it very clean,
very vanilla, simple as possible. Also because, to be honest with you, if the company goes well and you want to expand, they give you, you know, the tick-tail example, but I can give you many others. We might have value also in bringing in a US co-investor. So we want to just have the most vanilla, basic, you know, legal framework, so that we can do that without any headache. So I don't see lots of differences. Well, obviously I see the differences. There are less VC firms, so if you wish, maybe a competition might be less developed. There will be just a bit less competition, right? If I am an entrepreneur in the Bay Area, I have, you know, what, 300-400 VCs that I can go and visit.
Right.
In Europe, you have a little bit less than that, and again, also quite geographically fragmented. Some of them might not just make sense for you because geographically are not the right fit. So I think it's more functional of, again, the size and the fragmentation of the ecosystem more than anything else.
All right.
I don't think you would see any difference between a term sheet from us and one from any tier one VC firm.
And you're also investing, like, you know, Banjo's Redwood City. So if you were competing with anybody, I don't know if you were, but you're competing against similar, maybe against benchmark, you know, locally, right?
Yeah.
So it could be anything like that. Yeah. So it makes sense. All right. Here's another one from Tom. It says, we are a U.S. consumer internet startup and thinking of expanding to Europe. So once again, expansion. What approach would you recommend? Hiring someone local to each country, working with an agent or a marketing company in specific countries, something else. So it probably depends somewhat on what their product is and what they're doing.
Right,
I
what's
know
the business?
we keep
what's
saying the
product,
same thing.
We keep say the same thing, and I do have a view about agents in general. Would you outsource your development team? Probably not. Why would you outsource your routes to market?
Yeah.
They seem quite core to what you do, right? So just because it's a different geography, then maybe it's not a priority right now to get into that geography. So in terms of methodology, I would say I'm a big believer that as everything in a company, if that is core to the business, we recommend that you go and do it. Then the way and the how and the when, I think that depends from a lot of specificality on the business.
Makes sense. And I would tell people, if you're thinking of doing that, one thing to consider is maybe if you get an investor who's from Europe, they can help make recommendations about, we know this great, salesperson for France or for Italy or whatever it might be, and they have much better network here than you might have.
Yeah. So I think that is a smart way. Goes both ways, right? It goes for us too, right? If at some point during the life cycle of the company we think the US is an important strategic lever of growth, I always try to say, okay, this is true. Maybe I want to have a US co-investor that could help me in the company building process to attack the US market.
Right.
And it's true maybe also the opposite way, right? If it's a US business which suddenly, look at Europe as a potential opportunity, then might make sense to think about a European investor as somebody that could help into that process, because you do have an element of company building, and local support might be helpful.
Absolutely, and I know in my case that's helped in the past, so definitely worth looking at. All right, so we've got another email here from Anna. It says, there seems to be little collaboration between the U.S. startup community and the European startup community. And again, I don't know if there is a European startup community, but her question is, why is that? And what can be done to change that? I know, there are a number of conferences now. Le Web has come over here, a number of startup weeks that are running. So do you see that? Do you see that there's not a lot of connection between the two, or has the internet sort of leveled the playing field and it's...
So let me give you an example. Let's think about that, because be specific probably is better.
Yeah.
So I gave you the example of Vivino. It seems to me a quite close collaboration to the US ecosystem. Right? This guy was in Copenhagen, built a company there. At some point decided to move to the US. He started building a team there. What does he get closer than that?
Yeah.
Let's talk about Ticktail. As I mentioned, the guys at Thrive invested. CEO is moving to New York. Some pieces of the company we built in New York. Some others we built in Stockholm. But think about, Vuga, a gaming company. I would say a big significant percentage of the customers are, American users. I think about, a SaaS company, Contentful, based in Berlin. They're just starting now, but it's, all the initial customers, they seem almost all of them coming from the US. So the beautiful thing, or think what we are going through now, is really believe that these boundaries, they really only exist in the mind of people that want to provide visas, more than in the minds of
government bureaucracy,
right? More than in the minds of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurs goes where they think the business is.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right.
For us on our side, just to be clear about that, right? So our asset, where we are good, Balderton Capital, is Europe and understanding of Europe, right? So we are never gonna go, in the US, doing investment right and left to compete with, everybody else, because it will not make any sense for us.
Right.
Our uniqueness is a deep understanding of the European market and a capability to help the company during the building phase, knowing the European ecosystem.
I'm curious. how do the VC firms here interact? Is it mostly? It's probably a small community, right? Smaller than the States.
Yeah, it's smaller in the States, but I think it's very similar like in the States, right? In some cases, we compete like crazy on a term sheet. In some other cases, we are fantastic friends. We all co-investors together.
So pretty similar.
I don't see any difference.
Yeah.
The only difference is probably the numbers, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. All right, we have another question here from Craig that says, products designed and built in the U.S. oftentimes have characteristics that should be tweaked when introduced into other markets. What are some of the product changes we should plan for when we introduce a product into Europe? Is it necessary to have a development team or teams in Europe to handle these? So similar to some of the other things we've talked about, right?
It is super tough to say without knowing the product.
Yeah, yeah.
I think obviously there are some layers of technology where you need to think that through. Some cases because of some legal implication, I think privacy is one, and what we discussed before, payments maybe is a different one, which payment systems in different countries and so on. But again, I really encourage to approach this problem a little bit more structurally, thinking about the strategic dimension of expanding to a new geography and the implication across all the organization, which product is one piece of the organization, right?
Yeah.
I don't think. One thing that is interesting, I want to bring it up, that I think it's an area where Europe has a lot to catch up. If I think about the last 15 years and all the learnings that has been happening in Europe and compare with the US, an area where I still feel there is a great area potential of improvement in Europe in terms of learnings from the US is actually the product development dimension of it. If I compare engineers in Europe and I compare with them in the Bay Area, I'm not sure there is such a big difference of talent. There might be difference of expertise and experience, right? There are obviously less companies, so there are less engineers in Europe that have been able to deal with some of the scalability issues of companies like Facebook or Google. So that obviously does an implication. But the practice of product design, I think it's an area where the Bay Area, especially from a consumer internet standpoint, has got a quite unique dimensions where a lot could be learned here in Europe. And I think in that perspective also a significant role is played by education. I really think that the ecosystem around Stanford has been a quite unique dimension to help entrepreneurs to build better products. And that I think is true in the areas of, for sure, is very true in the area of consumer internet, right?
I would agree.
So how can we in Europe, learn how to build better products, and where do we study to learn it? And it's an interesting question, right?
Makes sense. All right, here's a question from Jackie. If I'm looking to join a startup in London or Europe, what are some of the hottest, most rapidly growing companies right now? So, of course, that's all of your companies,
just
right?
go portfolio, Balderton.
Yeah, come on.
And that's it.
Let's see if you can name one outside of the Balderton portfolio.
It's like you have kids, right?
Yeah.
So which ones of you not kids would you like to have as a kid?
Yeah.
Are you asking me?
Oh, there's a bunch of them. Yeah. Well, I think Jackie might be looking for a job. So, like Uber is really hot in the States right now, growing like crazy, high valuations. Lots of people want to work there. Airbnb, lots. They're maybe Facebook and Twitter and some of the more established companies are less hot right now. So
I don't know. Look, honestly, I think there is a lot going on. Again, also depends which position she looking for. Is in marketing, is in engineering. What's the passion that Jackie has got from a product standpoint? Is something that I don't believe people should go and work for a hyped company. I think people should go for work in company where they feel an element of connection with it. it.
Yeah, they're passionate about
it because otherwise go work for a startup or go work for Goldman Sachs, it becomes the same, right?
Yeah. How do people find jobs here? Like is it the same? Is it on Craigslist and
network connections? Again, if you ask me, the smartest, they look for something. They know what they want, and they connect and network to look for something. I make a big deal of always giving 2-3 meetings a week to people that I think have high potentials.
Oh yeah, just meet them, you file it away, and maybe someday you need somebody.
Some of them one day become entrepreneurs and they may give you money. Some of them, they become just somebody that I may want to place in one of my companies. I'm very talent. Obviously, is one of the most important thing in this industry, right?
Absolutely. All right, here's one from Tom. It says, one of the hardest things about starting a company in Silicon Valley is finding and hiring technical people. How does London compare? Do they end up doing development in Eastern Europe? Interesting question.
So I think the situation in London is better than in the US from the Bay Area. US is a different world. From a competition standpoint, so if you want to put your eyes into an engineer, you probably have less of 3, 4, 5 different companies trying to competitively to get to the same person. Obviously, I don't like startups that do outsourcing of their development.
Yeah, me neither.
I know there are some companies that do that fairly successfully. I just think that creating a company a startup is an act of creation. It's like a paint. You don't know when you start something where you're going to end up, and I think having people around the table makes that creation process significantly easier and better because it allows serendipity. Right? I might have an idea, you might have a better idea. If we go to the bathroom together, maybe we can discuss that.
Yeah.
In our way to the bathroom.
Well, or maybe over lunch. I don't know.
There is an element of serendipity. Now, I do believe in some cases where you can have the intelligence in some places, and maybe you may want to use some muscles in terms of resources that you may in different geography. Okay, I can see that as a model, but again, there is a big difference between outsourcing that development, those muscles, or owning those resources, independent from where they are.
Yes, makes sense. All right, we've got time for one more.
That's another advantage of Europe, if you wish.
What's that?
The fact that you can have some resources in a country. I'll give you an example. I am very familiar with a company that based in Berlin that has been using some muscles resources in Poland, and it's very close.
Yeah,
it's not like trying to do that in a place with 7 hours of time zone difference.
Right? Or 15 hours, right? It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
So we've got time for one more. We've got about a minute left. This is an email from Ellen. What are the areas of investment you are most excited about right now? Is there an idea or an area that you would invest in right away if the company existed? So a company you've been waiting for, something you really want to see, or some of the areas that you like looking at.
So I'm very passionate about this topic. I am completely against it, in the meaning that the concept itself, I am against it. I feel that the best investment is an investment that I cannot pitch in my mind. And the moment in which I see it and the person is pitching to me, I say, wow, I never thought about that. Because this is not, we are not in the fashion business of following fashion waves. We are in the business of figure out, the special, wild animal in this sea of different type of animals. And what that animal looks like, you cannot know in advance. Only once you see it to say, okay, wow, this is something interesting.
Yeah.
So I am just totally the opposite in terms of my approach. I actually try to keep my brain as open as I can and figure out, okay, trying to be always surprised by what I'm listening, and never try to have the answers before asking the questions. If I do have a sense that something I feel very passionate about, then I go and start a company.
Yeah.
But that's a different job.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it. Well, we're out of time. Roberto, thank you for being such a great guest. If you want to follow Roberto on Twitter, you can go to his handle is @Bonanzinga. I'll let you figure out how to spell that. This will separate the real people who can figure out how to find him. Tune in next week for another episode of FounderLine. We have a special edition again next week from Paris. We'll be live on Thursday with our guest, who is Marie Ekland from Elia Partners and also from France Digital. So she made a little bit of news this week talking about how she's going to be leaving Elia Partners and possibly doing something different on the investing side. So it'll be great to hear from her. She's a great investor and very active in the French startup ecosystem. So it'll be a great show. It's next Thursday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time or 6:30 p.m. Paris time. Hope you'll join us for that. Thank you once again to our amazing sponsors, Orrick and Ustream. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @FounderLine. During the week, if you have questions you want to send in, you can tweet or email to help@founderline.com. You can also go to our website and subscribe to email updates. We'll let you know about upcoming guests. You can watch all of the previous episodes that are up there, and you can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Thanks for watching and joining us here in London today. Here's to the crazy ones, and we'll see you again next week from Paris.